Coming up on today's Wrestling News, Tony Khan dances on WCW's grave.
Eric Bischoff is done with wrestling.
We clear up the Corey Graves-Pat McAfee confusion.
And Drew McIntyre addresses WrestleMania criticisms.
I'm Michael Hamford.
And I'm Phil Chambers.
And this is the news, and we start with some pretty big news coming out of All Elite Wrestling, Phil. As has been sort of tracked for the last few weeks, Dynamite is very much approaching, outlasting WCW Nitro, and Tony Khan, to be absolutely fair to him, is taking a victory lap on this in a couple of different ways. On Twitter, he's been very dignified. To quote, he says, "After a big March Madness slam dunk AEW Collision weekend, we're looking forward to Wednesday and a stacked lineup on what will be the longest running weekly primetime pro wrestling show ever on TBS/TNT. Don't miss AEW Dynamite Wednesday night." Well, they then decided to call the show Spring Breakthrough as a point to sort of just stick it in WCW's face that they have beaten Nitro. Of course, the last ever Nitro was the Spring Break edition in March 2001, when Shane McMahon, of course, infamously appeared on the stage. And yes, Tony Khan will indeed, as the cars talk over me, the show will indeed sort of celebrate AEW Dynamite's 5 years on television, and indeed surpassing WCW Nitro on TNT and TBS. A huge achievement for any sort of number two in wrestling. And Tony Khan taking a couple of different victory laps. Quite nice to see.
Yeah, I enjoy this. I mean, and he's earned it, to be fair.
Yeah.
Like, he has passed a hell of a milestone with this, but it's just those, after all of those digs that Eric Bischoff has had at him over the years, he's just needling one back at him. In a big, middle finger of a wrestling show, and I'm kind of into it. I'm not gonna lie.
It's a sort of thing that WWE would do a little bit more of, and I welcome the bitchiness and the bitterness.
Yeah,
I'm all
absolutely. But speaking of the bitterness,
indeed,
Eric Bischoff has announced that he's done with professional wrestling. What? He was on his 83 Weeks podcast, and I'm just going to go up with the quote. He says, "I realize now that there is nothing I could do in professional wrestling that's ever going to bring me fulfillment. It's just not because I've done it and I'm proud of what I've done. Unless I can do something that could make me feel as excited as I felt back then about professional wrestling, I can't do it. I just don't have that desire to focus on that business any longer for Vince or for anyone else." So he went on to be asked about like Vince McMahon, like the rumors of him setting up another wrestling company and whether you'd ever work with him and that. Didn't say anything about not working with Vince McMahon as a human being, but was just saying, if I took a job like that, it would be taking it for the wrong reasons and would probably end up having the same results that I did in 2019. I'm just not that interested to commit that much to the industry. As much as I respect it and I am grateful for it, that period in my life is in the rearview mirror and I enjoy looking back to see it.
I mean, there's a lot of coincidences in this world, Phil, but it's just quite something that this record, this aforementioned big Dynamite Nitro record being surpassed, and then Eric Bischoff's like, I never fancied it anyway.
Yeah,
like,
not for me, guys.
No, never liked it in the first place, if anything. Like, didn't even want Nitro to stick around. Yeah. Bischoff's going to Bischoff, I suppose. I look forward to the day when he returns to pro wrestling and we can pinpoint the exact moment, as we're here today in Glasgow for the WhatCulture World Tour, to remember fondly on the time that Eric Bischoff quit forever.
Yeah.
Because if there's one thing you know about wrestling, it's not never say never, it's never say forever. Easy, he'll be back sooner rather than later. And potentially, so too will Corey Graves to the main roster. You may have noticed on this European tour, Corey Graves has been filling in for Pat McAfee, and Sean Ross Sapp had a bit more context on that during a Fight for Select Q&A. He noted that he hadn't heard if Pat McAfee would make any of the dates on this European tour, and that Graves will be the guy that slots into the spot for now. Some within WWE have felt this will eventually lead to Corey Graves getting back onto the main roster. Yeah, strange 2025 for Corey Graves. He was quite outspoken about not being used on the main roster in place of Pat McAfee and obviously Joe Tessitore and Wade Barrett on SmackDown and the like. He then found himself on NXT, where he initially promoted his first appearance as dropping a pipe bomb and then was off the show completely. Yeah. He's since returned to his seat on NXT, has been a good soldier, I guess, is good on the broadcast, which is no mean feat when you're working with Booker T. And maybe he has sort of got himself back in political good graces. We assume, as a result, he'll be covering Raw tonight in Glasgow, in the city, and presumably onto SmackDown in London on Friday as well. I mean, he's put in like 10 to 12 years with the company at this point.
I was just going to say that exact same thing.
It's a difficult spot to suddenly get sidelined, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And to get all of that taken out of you after you've put in so much work into like readdressing what his career was supposed to be and like redoing this side of things instead and focusing on that.
Yeah.
And he ended up doing a really good job and like ended up in a really good position within the company. And then to have that rug pulled is a little bit strange.
Yeah, it's WrestleMania season as well. Pat McAfee typically appears more at this time of year than like the second half of the year, doesn't he? So there's always that worst thing about holding on at least, or when that seat suddenly gets vacated, and keeping it yours. And
they're always going to be chasing the numbers, and Pat McAfee are going to be bringing in a lot more numbers than you, Corey Graves, unfortunately. And that's just one of those positions that you got to be in. But speaking of WrestleMania season, Drew McIntyre has been talking to the Daily Star about the criticisms around his sort of involvement in WrestleMania and this storyline between him and Damian Priest. Now he says that, I appreciated when the fans' reaction was, oh my goodness, it's Priest and Drew, there's nothing there. I'm like, bloody hell, give us a chance to tell a story. The thing with Priest has been going on since last year's WrestleMania when he cashed in after assaulted by Punk. And then he goes on to kind of reiterate what he was saying in the promos on WWE TV about like what the history is there and that they managed to pull actually quite a decent story out of nowhere for this. But it's just that thing of like, give us a goddamn chance to tell a story. Like, don't just overreact to one match announcement. He did then go on to call him a big emo vulture, which was quite entertaining, and said that if it goes all the way to Mania, it's a year in the making story and deserves the biggest stage of all to get his stupid looking ass kicked.
Well, you know, like it's Drew McIntyre at this point in his career feels like he's reached that point where he can kind of say anything and deliver it with a bit of a wry smile.
Yep.
I feel in Glasgow, I want to be very careful about how loud I speak negatively about Drew McIntyre. There is the point that there was the story that got out that he was apparently furious with his WrestleMania direction after the Rumble, and it seemed like that direction was Damian Priest all along. So I think some of this has started with expectations being lowered as far back as February, and now that they're trying to build it on television with, as you say, Priest was the kind of incidental benefactor of all the times that Punk and Drew were fighting with each other. It's not a bad way to tie those two things. But this started on a down note because Drew McIntyre allegedly, per the stories, was pretty unhappy with his direction. So I suppose
that might not be anything to do with Damian Priest. It's just not,
indeed,
not in the main event.
He wanted, like, he was looking right the way at the top of the card, and anything below that wasn't going to count.
It isn't a win.
But it's WrestleMania season. Wrestler's going to wrestle, worker's going to work. And I'm sure as well, Drew McIntyre and Damian Priest will have that like chip on the shoulder, that famous Undertaker Batista example of feeling slighted and then going and stealing the show. They'll want a bit of that WrestleMania, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
We're going to end this story with the highest of high notes, a nice sort of good news story from pretty much breaking here in UK time anyway. There was a benefit show last night for friend of the channel, Chris Bay. Obviously, those who watch the channel regularly will know what happened to him in TNA late last year, and then there was a story a couple of weeks ago of being able to see through his own social media account him kind of rising from his chair like it was a broken neck. It was looking super serious, and he's been going through very, very intense rehabilitation. At his own benefit show last night, he walked to the ring. You can see everything on Chris Bay's socials and everywhere else. You can search for it, find out a little bit more information. But from all of us, and indeed the wider wrestling community, absolutely amazing. So pleased to see Chris Bay back in good health, and we hope to see him, well, if not wrestling, certainly back part of the scene as soon as he's healthy and well to do so. Shout out Chris Bay. Awesome.
Absolutely incredible story. And if you've not listened to the interview or watched the interview with Chris Van Vliet as well, highly recommend that, where he just tells his full story and everything that goes behind it. Absolutely terrifying situation to be in, and he's coming through it amazingly. So huge shout out to Chris Bay. Lovely chap.
Very inspirational figure. So nice to end on a high note there. I suppose, Phil, now, like, you've watched this YouTube video, there's none anywhere else, is there?
Nowhere else. Apart from right here when you're continuing your YouTube journey.
We'll see you soon.